Hello. So, I've just finished reading this book, How Big Things Get Done, and it's one of those books I bought when I went into a book shop to buy another book and happened to pick this up because I hadn't seen it before, and I guess the colours caught my eye, and I liked the title and because of what it said on the front, the surprising factors behind every successful project from home renovations to space exploration, how big things get done. And also the reviews, or the one-word reviews on the front by Daniel Kahneman, very famous psychologist. I love his work. Important, that's what he says, important. Compelling, The Economist. I quite like The Economist. Unforgettable, Tim Harford. I've read some of his stuff and it was good, so I thought, okay, good reviews, I'll buy it. And then I picked up the back and read the back like I usually do. First review on the back is by the Financial Times. I really like the Financial Times. It's a great newspaper. Full of delicious anecdotes, contains valuable lessons about how to plan, forecast and execute any size of project, be it a kitchen remodeling or a high-speed train link. And then the blurb on the back, nothing is more inspiring than a grand vision that becomes a triumphant new reality. Apple's iPod went from a project with a single employee to a hugely successful product launch in less than a year, but such wins are the exception. Many big visions turn into nightmares. More modest projects such as launching a small business or making an IT system work also commonly fail. Why? Now, if you've ever tried to do anything and it's gone wrong and everybody's tried to do something, then that is probably of relevance to you. I certainly thought that was of relevance to me, and one of the reasons I purchased the book. Understanding what distinguishes the triumphs from the failures has been the life's work of University of Oxford professor Bent Flyvberg. I have no idea if I'm pronouncing that correctly, I do apologise. It's a Danish name, it's spelled Flyvberg. In How Big Things Get Done, he identifies the errors that lead projects to ruin. Full of vivid case studies from the Taj Mahal to the latest Pixar movies, this groundbreaking book reveals how to get any ambitious project done on time and on budget. Wouldn't that be nice? Ever renovated a room in your house? Important, instructive and entertaining. Daniel Kahneman, Nobel Prize winning author of Thinking Fast and Slow. Ignore this book at your peril. The New York Times. And I mean, these are serious guys. This guy, Bent Flyvberg, maybe. Bent Flyvberg is a professor at the University of Oxford and the IT University of Copenhagen, an economic geographer, and the world's leading mega project expert, according to global accounting network KPMG. He has consulted on over 100 projects costing 1 billion or more and has been knighted by the Queen of Denmark. So serious guy, which is important because, you're not going to read something about a project where the author knows nothing about it, right? So it's nice to know that the author knows what he's talking about, or she's talking about. Dan Gardner is a journalist at the New York Times best-selling author of... My words are all over the place today, I do apologise. Dan Gardner is a journalist and the New York Times best-selling author of Risk, Future, Babel and Super Forecasting. Anyway, I think this book is brilliant and very informative. I found it useful. I've certainly taken away a lot of lessons from it, which I'll try to apply, but such a pleasure to read. I love that. Some of the things from the book, the main takeaways from the book are think slow, act fast. And what that means is the projects that succeed are the projects that people spend a long time planning, a long time thinking of everything that could go wrong. Although that alone is not adequate, because there's a story in there about the Great Chicago Fire Festival where the guy spent ages and ages thinking of all the things that could go wrong and all the safety measures and everything, and he didn't have an outside view, which is one of the things that's recommended in here. An outside view is look at the project, firstly, not just from your perspective, get other people's perspective, and the outside view falls into under the umbrella of something else called reference class forecasting, which I'll talk about in a second. So there are thousands of people, tens of thousands of people gathered by some lake. Part of the safety was to have it on a platform on a lake, so if the house caught fire, which it was meant to, nobody would get harmed, right? So this big house was built to set alight, but the house never caught fire at all, because the one thing that he didn't consider, because he hadn't asked anybody else or looked at other projects, the one thing that goes wrong in big events is usually something goes wrong with the equipment. Guess what? The ignition switch didn't work. So everybody laughed at him and walked away. It was a huge embarrassment, a huge failure, and a big waste of money. Reference class forecasting is something that was invented by Mr. Bent Flyvberg in 2003 after the Prime Minister of the UK at that time, Gordon Brown, phoned him up and said, look, we need a new model for forecasting costs and time on big projects, and this guy is the world's leading expert on mega projects, don't forget. Gordon Brown, very smart guy, got a bad rap while he was in government, but came in at possibly the worst time to really ever become a politician. Of course, in the UK, as now, you had all these right-wing, volcano of bullshit newspapers. Oh, he's an idiot, he's this, he's that, basically because he wasn't a right-wing corporate cocksucker. But very, very smart guy. And look, of all the Labour politicians who were around back then, the only one who's still in politics, really. All the others have found another way to line their pockets. They don't give a shit about the country, they're just there to line their pockets or to help out, their interests, like Tony Blair and helping out Zionism. It was because of him. He was one of the factors that launched the illegal war in Iraq. Let's not forget. But that was just pure party time for Zionists, because it meant millions of Muslims would get killed, millions of Arabs. They're massively anti-Semitic, these Zionists. I'm going off track. Let me get back on track. All right. So in response to Gordon Brown's phone call, this guy came up with reference class forecasting. What that is to guess, what a project's going to cost and how long it's going to take. You look at other projects in that class, as many of them as possible. You gather data, and then you adjust up or down depending on your particular factors. So effective in actually forecasting costs and timescales. So the projects that were done underneath that framework actually came in on budget, on time. So effective it was that it was made law, not just in Britain but in several countries. It's probably been abandoned now because you had the Conservatives in power, and they don't like laws that hinder money making or whatever, or hinder giving contracts to their friends. It's all fucked up. But that's something you can do when you're setting up projects. If you're setting out to do something like renovate your kitchen or anything, look for other people who've done similar projects and get some estimates. Maybe get a mean average or something. See what problems they came up with. The more carefully you plan, the more carefully you practice, the more modelling you do, the better your project's going to go. And one of the things he talks about in here is get people with experience, because experience is super valuable. One of the stories he tells is about the Empire State Building, which went up below budget and on time, and that time was one of the tallest skyscrapers in the world. That never happens. Based on the tens of thousands of studies this guy's done, only 0.5% of projects don't go massively over budget, massively over time. Yeah, so 1 in 200. It might even be 1 in 2,000. It might be 0.5. I don't know, but it's a very small number. What do they all have in common? They're delivered by people with experience. They've got repeatability. So with the Empire State Building, it was basically a bigger version of a skyscraper that the guy in charge, the designer, the architect, chief engineer, whoever it was, had already built somewhere else. So it's not a unique building, it's just a bigger version of it. The floors were identical, a lot of them. So every time a floor was built, the people building it had practice. So as they went up and up, the actual building of each floor became faster. And one of the examples used in here is also the Pentagon building. And that's used to show that when people rush into a project, it's probably going to go wrong. Acting fast, thinking slow, which is the opposite of what they say in Silicon Valley. Fail fast, doesn't work. There's some brilliant stories in there. One of them is about how Jimi Hendrix decided to build a studio, and it was one of the few examples. The reason it's in it, it's one of the few examples that this guy's detractors use to say, no, you should just start the project and figure it out as you go along. If you took 1 million of those projects that started like that, probably one would succeed. But psychologically, we love those stories. So one of those stories is how Jimi Hendrix, I love Hendrix, built Electric Ladyland Studios with somebody with no experience. He'd never built anything before. They often run out of money. He literally got paid with bags of money. So when they ran out of money, he'd go out on tour. he'd get bags with tens of thousands of dollars on them. He'd put them on the plane, fly them back, work would resume. But that actually turned out to be one of the best studios in the world. Super famous. He only was able to use it for a little while because he died 2 years later. But excellent, excellent story. I love that story. That's a guy who argues for the whole jump in and figure it out as you go approach. Is the Hendrix story is one of the examples he uses, but he's only got 12 examples, whereas this guy, the Danish guy, has got tens of thousands of examples. So get someone experienced to do something, you'll probably do better. Get somebody with a team, don't try and build a team. An experienced team to do things, and you'll probably do better. That was the case with the Empire State Building, that was the case with the Hoover Dam. And it's just an excellent book. I could go on for ages about it, but I actually made some notes here for once, and I'll just give you a few snippets of this. So Jorn Utzon is the guy who actually designed the Sydney Opera House, one of the most famous buildings in the world. You've never heard of him probably, because it was his first design to get commissioned. He wasn't experienced. The politicians behind it wanted to rush in and start building without the practice. They acted fast. They didn't plan. They didn't think slow and act fast. They just acted fast. It was, hundreds of times maybe more expensive than it was meant to be. Not hundreds of times, right? Hundreds of percentage more expensive than it was meant to be. It took years and years to get right. And Jorn was actually, so his career was destroyed. He had to leave the country in disguise. He died at the age of 90, nobody knows his name. Then the opposite of that is Frank Gehry, who designed the Guggenheim Museum. Jorn was 38 at the time, didn't have much experience. Frank Gehry, one of the world's most famous architects, who designed the the Guggenheim Museum, which is one of the world's most famous. But he'd had tons of experience beforehand, and his design process is painstakingly slow and detailed. Builds models out of cardboard, out of wood, out of everything before he actually breaks ground. So all the problems that could happen have already been sorted out. And another example of that is quoted used in the book is Pixar Animation Studios. Before they pay any expensive actors, before they start production, they spend years in the planning, assessing, replanning, reshooting, rewriting process. And they are probably the most successful studio in the world. So this review is now 12 minutes. I'm going to end it. I give this book 10 out of 10. I loved it. It doesn't matter what you're doing. I mean, the lessons in there are useful. I was reading about it and thinking about my own job and my own career and thinking, oh my God, I could use this, I could use that. Scalability, which is another thing you'll learn about in here. Scalability is what makes wind farms and solar energy the best, cheapest, most reliable sources of renewable energy there is. And even with nuclear power now, which has failed massively, it even failed in China. And the reason that's important is because in China you don't get red tape, you don't get NIMBYism, because the government decided in China it's going to happen. And in China, when the government decides something, it happens. Simple as that. No barriers. But in China, after a decade of trying, nuclear energy really hasn't taken off. But what they've done now is they've come up with something called SMRs. When I say they, I mean nuclear engineers, which is a small reactor that can maybe power a single factory. And then if you need more power, you just add another one. So it's like Lego. Scalability is like Lego. So use the Lego idea in your life. Make sure you do things which are repetitive. Plan slowly. I could go on forever. Read the book. I think you'll enjoy it.